Hi, today we're diving into how our cells get the energy they need to stay alive and power everything from movement to thought. This process is called cellular respiration, and by the end, you'll see how it connects to what happens when you run, work out, or even breathe. So our learning goals today are going to be based on the TEKS, according to the state of Texas, and we've been working with these with the previous videos, so we are staying aligned with what the state of Texas wants to make sure biology students know. We're going to describe what happens in cellular respiration, we're going to compare aerobic and anaerobic processes, and connect everything to real-life energy use. We'll even wrap all of it up with a short scientific explanation using a CER to keep practicing that claim, evidence, and reasoning. So, we want to make sure that we are not forgetting some of the things that we've been learning about, especially ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is the main energy currency in your living cells, and we want to know how it works, not just be able to use the term. So here's the breakdown in simpler terms. ATP is made of adenine, which is a nitrogen-based ribose. It's a sugar. There's 3 phosphate groups. The last 2 phosphates are linked by a high energy bond, and that last bond is like a loaded spring, and when it breaks, ATP loses one of its phosphates, and it becomes adenosine diphosphate, and it's a separate and another separate phosphate. This breaking releases energy for the cell to use. So I know some of the words, and I am not great at pronouncing them myself, but it's that breaking that causes that release of energy, like a little mini bomb going off to give you that energy. So this energy is used for muscle movement, sending nerve signals, moving substances across cell membranes, and building important molecules like our proteins, DNA, all of that. ATP is recyclable, which is great. It helps us be very efficient. Your body is constantly turning ADP plus phosphate back into ATP using cellular respiration in our mitochondria. That's why we call our mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. This also can happen in photosynthesis in plants. Remember, photosynthesis is something only plant cells can do, but plant cells can also do cellular respiration because plant cells have mitochondria. They're going to use photosynthesis far more, but they can do both processes for energy production. Animal cells, like your eukaryotic human cells, those are going to only be able to use cellular respiration. The mitochondria is going to produce our power, our energy. So a single cell uses millions of ATP molecules every second, which that's why ATP matters. It's a fast, instantly available energy, it's efficient, it's small but powerful, and it's rechargeable. It can continue to be regenerated again and again and again at the cellular level. So let's start with something a little interesting, more than just reviewing our ATP and ADP. Why do your legs burn when you sprint or run, but they don't burn so much when you're jogging or walking? With your table partner, I want you to complete an I notice and an I wonder phenomena study. Why do you think your legs burn when you run and they don't burn when you walk or jog? So take a minute, maybe pause the video, and jot down that I notice, those statements, and the I wonder, the question. So you all have run at some point in your life, so I want you guys to use that for your I notice component. We don't need to actually run right now, but that's where you're basing your I notice from. What did you experience? So you get to be the test subject here. And then your I wonder, what questions do you have about that now that it's come up in this phenomena study, that we're taking time to intentionally think about it? All right, so at this point in my class, I want to take 5 minutes. I want us to break off into those pairs and complete an I notice and an I wonder phenomena study. My expectations are 3 I notice statements and 3 I wonders questions from both participants. So this is not just 6 between 2 people. This would be 12 between the 2 of you. All right, so now that you have that in your notebooks, let's think about some of this vocabulary. And we already reviewed ATP, mitochondria, that's an organelle that is the powerhouse of the cell, and glycolysis. So that's going to be something that we haven't talked about yet. The Krebs cycle, that's another vocabulary word you should be responsible for. ETC, that's something that is in your textbook that was mentioned in the reading we've already done. Fermentation, and we've talked about that a little bit in class, at least for some of the class periods. And also, I want you guys to make sure that we are being very mindful of our aerobic versus our anaerobic. So I want you to, when you're thinking of the vocabulary, and if you're writing it down, continue to compare. There's a reason I have aerobic versus anaerobic. Use the comparative between the two to help set them apart. They're different. Okay, so why do your cells need energy? Why do we need energy? Well, all cells need energy. This is going to be true for prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. And it's not just muscles and brains and skin cells. This holds true for all cells, and I do mean that, all cells. They all use energy to do things like move, divide, and transport materials. The energy currency cells use is a molecule we call ATP, and we already talked about that. So now let's think about cellular respiration. We're finally getting into the content. So cellular respiration is how your eukaryotic animal cells in your body make ATP from food, especially glucose. We've talked about photosynthesis and how glucose is a byproduct of photosynthesis. Well, now it's coming up again. So there are 2 main ways that your cells are going to make ATP. And the first is aerobic, and that happens with oxygen. So aerobic happens with oxygen, and anaerobic happens without oxygen. And this process has 3 main stages. So cellular respiration has 3 main stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, so ETC. And they all have the purpose of making ATP, energy, from glucose, a sugar. So you're going to see and hear some hard to pronounce words. I like to abbreviate them because that is easier to read and understand, and I like the periodic table. I think it's a great thing as scientists that we've come up with to help make smart efficiencies with our own notes and how we refer to things. So FADH2, like NADH, is an electron carrier molecule, and it's used in cellular respiration. So you're going to hear about these. So you're going to hear about them, you're going to see them. So let's clarify, since we're going to see and hear these things. So FADH2 is flavin adenine dinucleotide, and it's a reduced form of it. It's made from FAD after it picks up 2 electrons and 2 protons. And this conversion happens during your Krebs cycle. NADH stands for nicotinamide, nicotinamide. It's hard to say, guys. Adenine dinucleotide. And it's another reduced form of it. And it's a coenzyme, which means it helps enzymes do their jobs. And remember, enzymes help us do jobs in a fast and efficient way by using less or doing something faster. And it specifically is going to carry electrons during cellular respiration. So FADH2 acts like a delivery truck for those high energy electrons, and it takes these electrons to the electron transport chain, the ETC, in the mitochondria. In the ETC, it drops off those electrons, and those electrons help pump protons across the mitochondrial membrane. And this is part of the process of making ATP, energy. Whereas NADH does the same basic job as FADH2, but is a bit more powerful. It delivers electrons to the ETC, creating a proton gradient that drives ATP production. And each NADH can help make up to 3 ATP molecules. And they both matter because these are both essential energy couriers, or energy carriers, in cellular respiration. Without them, the electron transport chain wouldn't have electrons to work with, meaning there would be no ATP. It couldn't be made, and your cells would quickly run out of energy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about glycolysis, because I've brought it up. First, the main parts. There's no energy required. It produces 2 ATP, and it breaks your glucose into pyruvate, and it occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. So that's not a lot happens in the cytoplasm, and so this is a little neat thing that does happen there. This is like a kickoff step of turning food into usable energy in your cells. And it means essentially that what's happening in glycolysis is a starting point. You begin with 1 glucose molecule, which is a sugar with 6 carbons. It breaks down. That glucose gets split into 2 smaller pieces called pyruvate, and each pyruvate has 3 carbon. Energy input and output. So you have to spend 2 ATP at the start to make this reaction happen. So it's not a cheap reaction to start, but it does have product at the end. It's that initial 2 ATP acts sort of like an activation fee or a cover charge to get into a club. You end up making 4 ATP at the end. So you need to pay 2 and then you get 4 back. So the net gain is 2 ATP total. You also make 2 NADH, which are electron carriers that will be used later in your electron transport chain to make more ATP. And this is, again, happening in the fluid part of the cell, the cytoplasm. No mitochondria or oxygen is needed for this because it's happening in the cytoplasm. And this can happen in any type of cell, even bacteria. So this can be a prokaryotic or a eukaryotic cell that can do glycolysis. And it's important because it's step 1 for both aerobic with oxygen and anaerobic without oxygen respiration. It's also fast. This is useful when your body needs that quick energy, like you're sprinting. It makes pyruvate, which goes into the Krebs cycle if oxygen is around, or into fermentation if there's no oxygen around. This is like putting 2 coins into a vending machine to make it start, and then getting 4 coins back. You get pyruvate and NADH, and you keep 2 ATP. So this is a really neat function within your cells. Okay, so stage 2, the Krebs cycle. We just mentioned it. Let's talk a little bit more about it. This happens in your mitochondria. It uses pyruvate to produce carbon dioxide and electron carriers, and it produces 2 ATP. This means that this second cycle, the second stage, your creep cycle, it's continuing to get energy from food. It's all about preparing fuel for the electron transport chain, the ETC, where the bulk of ATP is made. And the simplest way I can describe it is it's a process where first glycolysis in the cytoplasm splits glucose into two pyruvate molecules. Now, in the Krebs cycle, those pyruvates can enter the mitochondria for the Krebs cycle. And what happens in the Krebs cycle, the input is pyruvate from glycolysis. The main actions in the Krebs cycle, it breaks pyruvate down completely into carbon dioxide, a waste gas you breathe out. It strips away the high energy electrons and loads them onto helper molecules, your NADH and FADH2. It makes a little ATP, 2 total per glucose, and this matters because the ATP here is small change. The real prize is the NADH and the FADH2. These are the charged batteries that are going to power the electron transport chain, the ETC, in the next stage. And that's next stage is where most of your cell's ATP is going to be produced. I like to think of the Krebs cycle as a power plant. Glycolysis breaks things down that you can then throw into the power plant as fuel, and the Krebs cycle is the power plant starting to use that fuel and pack it into usable ways of energy. So it's a neat cycle. Next, okay, so we've said electron transport chain a whole bunch. This is going to happen in that inner mitochondrial membrane. It uses oxygen to produce up to 34 ATP. That's right, 34. Oxygen is a final electron acceptor here. So what this means is that in aerobic respiration with oxygen, the electron transport chain, the ETC, is the step that produces the majority of your ATP. All the other steps before this, they're not producing a lot. This is where your ETC, your electron transport chain, becomes your big ATP factory. The electrons carried in by NADH and FADH2 from earlier stages, the glycolysis and Krebs cycle, are used here to make up to 34 ATP molecules from one glucose. That is an excellent return. Oxygen is the key player though. At the very end of the ETC, oxygen catches those electrons. Without oxygen, this chain gets clogged. Electrons stop moving, hydrogen ions stop being pumped, and ATP production comes to a standstill. It stops. If there's no oxygen, the ETC shuts down, and your cells have to rely on anaerobic respiration like fermentation, which makes much less ATP. You only get 2 per glucose from glycolysis. So to summarize, the ETC is like a high-speed electricity generator that only works if oxygen is there to keep the flow moving. If there's no oxygen, there's no energy payoff, at least not a very good one. So we've talked about with oxygen, aerobic, and without oxygen, anaerobic. Anaerobic respiration and fermentation are when oxygen is unavailable. Lactic acid can build up. You also will have your alcoholic reactions like with yeast. This is a very inefficient way of producing ATP. You only get 2 ATP produced in these types of respiration cycles. So anaerobic respiration and fermentation it's a backup plan really for energy. Anaerobic respiration is a type of cellular respiration that doesn't use oxygen, obviously, and it's used when cells can't get enough oxygen, like during intense exercise or in an oxygen-poor environment. Deep soil, stagnant water can also have cells use anaerobic respiration during those periods. But remember that phenomena study? Why do your muscles burn when you run? This might be where we find some answers. Cells still are going to use anaerobic respiration because your cells need energy to survive. So they will take whatever they can get, and this is sometimes the best they can do. They want to survive. So anaerobic respiration allows your cells to keep making small amounts of ATP even without oxygen. Fermentation is the process that follows glycolysis. When there's no oxygen available, it's going to recycle materials needed to keep glycolysis going and prevent energy shutdown. There are two main types of fermentation. We have lactic acid fermentation, and that happens in human muscle cells and some bacteria. In human muscle cells, this is going to happen, that lactic acid fermentation, during intense exercise, when you sprint or run, and it produces lactic acid and 2 ATP molecules. So you're getting some energy, but you're also producing lactic acid. And unfortunately, in human muscle cells, that lactic acid builds up in your muscle and it causes a burning sensation. So the other fermentation method is the alcoholic fermentation. This is going to happen in yeast and some plants. It produces alcohol, ethanol, and carbon dioxide and 2 ATP. This actually is something that humans have been harvesting on purpose. We do this on purpose sometimes. With baking, carbon dioxide makes your bread rise in the oven. So if you're making sourdough bread, that lift is coming from alcoholic fermentation. If you are going to produce alcoholic beverages, this has been going on since prehistory, where we've been using alcoholic fermentation in order to have this effect. All right, so we've talked a lot about different things. Aerobic versus anaerobic, the different stages of from glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain. All of this has been a lot. So right now, I want you to take a minute, look at your table partner, and compare your notes. Look at each other's notebooks, compare them. See if you have better notes or if they have better notes. If there's any gaps you might have, now's a great time to fill in those gaps. If you need something repeated, now is the time to go back and get that information, get that detail that you might need. I don't want you guys to ever stress out about your notebooks, but I do want you guys to consistently be trying to have the best possible notebook. You want other people to want to see your notes. That's the goal here. So take a minute, pause, let's look at that, let's fill in any gaps that we might have. Now is your opportunity to ask those clarifying questions, to find out how other people are thinking, because maybe their thought process is going to help your thought process. So here's what my notes look like. And again, your notes don't need to look just like mine, but this is a great way if you are still struggling to take some of these notes. You want to make sure you have vocabulary. If something needs a diagram, now start practicing those different skills within your own notebook. You're going to figure out what makes sense for your brain and what doesn't work for you. Some of my friends who have been taking very detailed notes and color changing the pens and markers, they might be finding that that isn't sustainable. Others, it's not a problem. They can easily do that, switching between the colors and highlighting and all that. But you need to start figuring out what is working for your notes. And it's going to get easier. It always gets easier. The more you do, the easier it becomes. All right, so if you need to, you can always pause, copy what you need, see if there's anything, oh man, I forgot to add that, and that's good information. Maybe I don't have information you added, and that's okay. All right, I love a good recap. So, cellular respiration is the process that gives your cells energy. Most of the time, your body uses oxygen to do this cellular respiration very efficiently. Sometimes that oxygen is going to run low, like during your intense activity times, running, sprinting, and your cells need to switch to a backup method, and that's going to be a type of fermentation. It's not going to be as efficient as if there's oxygen available, but you still are getting energy somehow, some way. So before you go, jot down one thing you learned today and one question you still have. This will help drive our conversations going forward. And there's always more. And sometimes I'm not the best at explaining it, and so I want to know those questions. So please ask them. Uh, Sometimes I go through something too fast. Sometimes I go through other things way too slow because I'm personally interested in them. It's okay to struggle, but I don't want you guys to struggle needlessly. So if you have questions, please always ask your questions. All right. Now, this is a great time for our thought experiments, our CERs. This helps clarify our own thought process. It helps make us more refined with our thinking. So, we're going to do a CER, claim evidence reasoning, and here's your question. Why do muscles rely on anaerobic respiration during intense exercise? Your claim, I want you to write a one-sentence answer to that question. Your evidence, I want you to use specific facts from what we just talked about, like the role of oxygen or what lactic acid does. Your reasoning, remember, reasoning is not just repetition of your evidence. Your reasoning should explain how the evidence supports the claim. Use your notebook. I will always help with this. I want to make sure that this is a good opportunity to start getting more elegant with your thought process. Science is just the study of what we already know. It's our natural world. And so I want you to start looking at it more deeply. And that's what these CERs are for. They're not just here as a time filler. I want you to start making connections. And the only way to start making connections is to have questions introduced into our life that we are going to answer. So if you have questions, please ask. If you don't have questions, oh my golly gosh, I am so happy to hear that. Have a great day.